The annual meeting of the National Governors Association this year in State College, Pennsylvania, the home of Penn State University. We have a small studio set up in the room where the plenary sessions are being held. And joining us for the rest of our program this morning for another 25 minutes, Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico. Governor, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. The NGA is a place where governors share and trade ideas about things they're doing in their states. What's a program or two that you're working on in New Mexico that would be a good idea for other governors to copy? What's been a success at home?
Well, without exception, this is about best practices, and without exception, I think I come away from this meeting thinking we're doing a lot of things right. We have taken federal highway money and bonded it, and as a result, we were able to finance some projects that I think other states have used as a model. In other words, taking that federal money and bonding. Never been done before, and as a result, like I say, we're building roads that we would not have otherwise built. I believe there are hundreds of other projects nationwide that have modeled themselves after New Mexico. And then going back years now, we shifted from a fee-for-service model for Medicaid to managed care. And at the time we were making that shift, I got a lot of feedback from a lot of other governors who had wished they had done that across the board, all medical services. So again, this ends up to be a place where you can talk about what you're planning on doing, what you've done, and best ideas.
Governor Gary Johnson, first elected in 1994, in his second term, is the first governor in New Mexico history to serve 2 consecutive terms. Governor, how'd you do that?
Well, it was a change in the law, so I was only the second governor that had an opportunity to do that. And there have been 2-term governors before, Lou, but not for 8 years. So I'm the first 8-year governor of New Mexico, and trying to make the most of that opportunity.
A lot is written about your administration and your position and thoughts on the case for drug legalization. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that issue and how you came to have the policy that you do.
Well, I think one of the biggest failures in this country right now is our war on drugs. I don't think we can arrest and incarcerate our way out of this situation. And so I really think that we need to be looking at the legalization of marijuana, and I think we need to have some policies to reduce the harm when it comes to other drugs. As governors, half of what we spend, this isn't just New Mexico, this is every single state in the country, and this is federal. Half of what we spend on law enforcement, half of what we spend on the courts, and half of what we spend on prisons is drug-related. We have got to do better. And of course, when you start talking about the legalization of marijuana, you start to talk about harm reduction strategies with regards to other drugs. Immediately, people have this belief that somehow you're condoning drug use. Well, this is not about condoning drug use. Lou, I haven't had a drink of alcohol in 13 years, and I suggest that I'm not governor of New Mexico if I'm drinking, because I think it's a real handicap. And yet, not for a minute would I suggest that drinking alcohol should be illegal, that it should be criminal. And yet, at one point in this country's history, it was illegal. And certainly, I would not condone smoking cigarettes, and yet not for a minute do I think that it should be criminal. And yet we've criminalized the use of these drugs. 80 million Americans have done illegal drugs, and whether we want to admit it or not, 54% of the kids that graduate from the class of 2000 will have done illegal drugs. I love my kids. I don't want my kids to end up in jail because they've made a terrible choice, which a lot of people do make this terrible choice, and that's the situation.
Being governor, has this been a bully pulpit for this idea? Have you been able to spread your ideas fairly easily?
Well, this is so misunderstood. This is incredibly misunderstood. I would like to think that I'm not a fool, and by that I mean I knew what the reaction was going to be. The reaction was going to be furor and misunderstanding, and that doesn't take away from the fact that it should be talked about, and that I would argue again, perhaps it's the biggest issue in the country that's going unaddressed. We've got our heads in the sand on this issue. We're arresting 1.6 million people a year on drug-related crime. 800,000 of those arrests are for marijuana. And of those marijuana arrests, of those 800,000 marijuana arrests, half of those are Hispanic. Lou, tell me that half the users of marijuana in this country are Hispanic. Point is, they're not. These are terribly discriminatory laws that adversely affect Hispanics and blacks, and so they're not fair. They're not being administered fairly.
In articles about your position, you mentioned that the other side often says, well, what kind of message is that sending? How do you respond to that argument about what it says to kids?
Well, let's talk about kids for a second. First of all, I tell kids, don't do drugs. You tell your kids, don't do drugs. Teachers tell kids not to do drugs. Nobody is sending a message, do drugs, and yet 54% of our kids are doing drugs. So let's not get our heads in the sand on this. 54% of the kids are doing drugs. I tell my son, I tell my daughter, my son was a graduate of the class of 2000. My daughter's 21 years old, she's at Boulder. I tell my kids, don't do drugs. In spite of that, 54% of these kids do drugs, and you know what? I don't want my kids to go to jail. I don't want their future opportunities ruined because they've made a bad choice. And again, statistically, more than half of our kids are going to try this. It's a bad choice, but we've got to distinguish between bad choice and arresting and ruining people's lives. I like to draw a distinction, and the distinction is that you do drugs and you do crime, that's always going to be against the law. Always. You do drugs, you do harm, you drink, you do harm, that's always going to be against the law. But fundamentally, if you're smoking marijuana in the confines of your own home, doing no harm to anybody but yourself, do you belong in jail? I don't think you belong in jail. Fundamentally, you do not belong in jail for that. You've made a bad choice, and again, I'll argue that to the hilt, but in jail? I don't think so.
Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico with us until the top of the hour, a little less than 20 minutes. On the line for Democrats is Portland, Maine. Good morning.
Hi, Governor Johnson. I have a question and actually a comment also. I agree with your policy on treating people who abuse substances and have drug problems, that making criminals out of kids that experiment or abuse drugs is only detrimental to their future. We just had a case in Maine where an 18-year-old kid in high school was convicted of a crime and had called in I think it was a bomb threat, and was convicted as a convicted felon at the age of 18 for doing something that an 18-year-old kid did, although it is a serious crime, granted. But I also have a question for you. Being a Republican, are you supporting Governor Bush for president?
I am supporting Governor Bush, and hope he gets elected and become a good friend. And I was listening to Tommy Thompson earlier for all the reasons that you all have heard ad nauseum. I believe every one of them. I think George Bush would make a great president. What will your role be in the campaign? Anything that the Bush campaign asks me to do, I will be gladly participating in. And again, right out front, I think George Bush would make a great president. When you talk about issues like Social Security and the ability to invest some of our own money, I think that fundamentally that might change the fabric of America. When you have teachers that for the first time are going to own a little bit of IBM, General Motors, Ford, Intel, IBM. That might change, again, the fabric of this country, because mainstream America will own corporate America. On our line for Independence is Louisville, Kentucky. Good morning. You're on with Governor Johnson.
Governor, good morning. I wanted to ask you about this, the drug thing. I know I think you're being very open and honest about a situation that people know exists, and I know Al Gore admitted he smoked marijuana. And I kind of have a problem with Governor Bush, because back early in the year when he was asked about his use of drugs as a younger man, he said, well, I'm not going to play the gotcha game. And to me, that's just it looks like he's just trying to avoid the issue. And I guess my question is, how can you, respect an individual or consider voting for them when they don't really answer the question? Like I said, Gore admitted, that he did use marijuana, and I know several other people have been kind of forthcoming, and I think it's just typical of Governor Bush, just like on the abortion issue. I know last night on Hardball, they had Governor Ridge of Pennsylvania, because, he's been mentioned as a vice presidential candidate, but they kept asking about the abortion thing, and they said, well, Governor Bush is not going to have a litmus test yet. They went back and forth, and I guess my question is, it seems like Governor Bush is sending a lot of mixed signals to people on a lot of issues, and I just wonder, how the American people are supposed to interpret that.
Well, this is a terrible issue. I mean, 80 million Americans have done illegal drugs, and given the wrong set of circumstances, we uphold the laws in this country. We got 80 million Americans behind bars. It's a difficult political issue. This is a political taboo to be discussing, so it's a hard one. George Bush doesn't say yes or no. He's not alone in that category when it comes to politicians not answering this question. Personally, I have smoked marijuana. I think that I think one thing that we're not willing to face is the fact that 95% of the people that smoke marijuana just like a lot of Americans have a cocktail in the evening. They don't have a problem with their use, and yet again, we've criminalized this behavior.
Bryson City, North Carolina, on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, the governor, he's a breath of fresh air, really. And
I've heard it described otherwise.
No, there's a lot of people out here feel that way. And all I can say to the governor, keep up the good work, and I just wish there's more people like him. Thank you.
Well, it's great of you to say, and again, let's reiterate here, this is not about condoning drug use. Just like I can say, don't drink. I haven't had a drink in 13 years. Don't smoke. And it's always going to be against the law to do drugs and do crime, to do drugs and do harm. But let's draw a distinction. You're smoking marijuana in the confines of your own home, doing no harm to anyone, arguably, other than yourself. And I would argue you're doing yourself harm, but I don't think it should be criminal.
Krebs, Oklahoma. Good morning.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to ask the governor why it is that all Republicans go and report to George W. And you don't never say anything about how bad he is in Texas.
Governor?
It's kind of garbled, but I think what I got was how come they're not talking about that bad job he's done in Texas? From my vantage point, he's done a good job in Texas. Now, that's from my vantage point, and like I say, personally, I'm going to vote for him. He's talking about the right things when it comes to school choice, when he's talking about Social Security, when he's talking about freedom, holding individuals accountable for their own actions, law and order, America. I'm talking about reasonable environmental policy. Again, I just go down the list and I find myself aligned with his philosophy.
Governor, on the webpage abcnews.com today is a story under the headline, "Where Heroin Lives." A small New Mexico town devastated. It's about a small town called, is it pronounced Chimayo, just north of Santa Fe?
Chimayo, yes.
Chimayo.
Yes.
This is on this webpage today. Tell us a little bit about this town and what's happened there.
Well, let me just point out that Chimayo isn't unlike a lot of towns in America. It's not unlike America, and that is that we've got thousands of heroin addicts that wake up every single morning looking for one thing, and that's their next fix. Isn't there something we can do when it comes to heroin? Aren't there a lot of things that we can do to reduce the harm that heroin wreaks on our society, like reducing crime? They've got heroin maintenance programs in Switzerland where you basically get a prescription to go into a clinic to get heroin. So you go into the clinic, you ingest the heroin at the clinic. A number of things have been covered here. There isn't the incentive to go out and commit crime to buy the heroin because the heroin costs a tenth of what it might cost out on the street. There isn't the disease and negative health consequence because needles are clean. There isn't overdose because the product is a prescribed amount of product. There isn't the need for addicts to go out and recruit other heroin addicts. So when you look at Chimayo, when you look at America today, is the problem prohibition or is the problem use? And I don't want to discount the use side of this, but when you really boil it down, how many times are we going to wake up every single morning and read about a heroin drug dispute gone bad played out with guns rather than in the courts? And we read about it every single day, and we become numb to how our lives are affected. As we're watching, as we're sitting here right now, homes are being burglarized in the name of money for heroin. How might we adopt strategies that can reduce this terrible scourge? And is the scourge made so much worse? Is the scourge actually prohibition, or is the scourge actually the use? Not to discount the problems with use.
Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico has a BA in political science from the University of New Mexico, and before running for office was the founder and operator of Big J Enterprises, a commercial and industrial construction business. And our next call for the governor is from San Antonio. Good morning.
Good morning, Governor. I'm a longtime admirer of yours and the great state of New Mexico. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. And everything you say about legalization is absolutely correct, I think, and we need to hear more of that. It makes a lot of sense. You've got a lot of good sense on that. But I had a question about the state of New Mexico and the doctor flight. Can people still get doctors? I know doctors don't practice there much anymore because of the gross receipts tax, maybe other things. I know that you're a poor state, partly due to the great amount of federally owned land and the low tax base from that, but isn't there a tax on gross receipts for doctors and other professionals, and it makes it hard for people to get medical care?
There is, and that's something I've worked now 6 years to try and get repealed, eliminated. Again, it's terribly regressive when you have to go get health care and you have to pay a sales tax to your doctor. My brother happens to live in San Antonio. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon. I'd like to get him back in New Mexico.
St. Cloud, Minnesota. I'm sorry, Governor, go ahead.
Well, I want to get back to drugs a little bit. My brother's a cardiothoracic surgeon. He talks about the fact that he sees a number of cases every year of infected heart valves due to intravenous drug use. It's not the drug use that infects the heart valves, it's dirty needles that infect the heart valves. Back to strategies that will stop the, and where do dirty needles come from? Dirty needles are a prohibition phenomenon. They're not an actual use phenomenon. So back to strategies, needle exchange, that we deal effectively with the reality that thousands and thousands of Americans every morning in this country wake up with a heroin habit that is costing each and every one of us.
St. Cloud, Minnesota, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
Hi, Governor. Say there's two questions I have, and I hope you'll, in fact, I beg you to not hang up on me and let me ask both questions. The first one is, I don't
have the power to hang up. Or...
Hello?
Go ahead, caller.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have smoked pot in the past, like you claim you have, and I believe you. What I'm saying is, you and I both know that when you get drunk, the next day you may be hungover, but you're aware of what you're doing. When you get stoned, you may forget you put the clothes in the dryer or the washing machine. If you're running heavy equipment, you're putting other people's lives at stake. I work in an industry where people die about 3 times a year, which is tragic. It's in the quarry industry. If people are stoned and running an overhead crane, they may have gotten stoned the night before, but the next day, they're not as sharp as they were if they were not smoking pot.
I realize you have 2 questions.
But go ahead.
Yeah, let me answer that first one. First of all, I think getting back to drawing a line here, and I'm not the dictator, I'm the governor. But if I were to design drug policies, I would like to see employers be able to discriminate against drug users. In other words, you need to make a choice. You need to make a choice on whether or not you want to operate that heavy equipment or you want to smoke pot. You want to be an astronaut, you want to smoke pot. You want to be a fireman, you want to smoke pot. That should be a decision, and employers should be able to discriminate. And in my construction company, I drug tested. I wanted my workplace free from drugs, and we did that through drug testing, talking about the situation that you're now describing. No, I don't want somebody on that heavy equipment having smoked marijuana the night before, and so I drug test to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Minnesota got a lot
back to that individual. That individual shouldn't be operating that heavy equipment, but if that individual is not operating heavy equipment, if they're in the confines of their own home, smoking pot, doing harm to nobody but themselves, I don't think they belong in jail.
Minnesota, a lot of folks in line, so we're going to try to get a few other calls in quickly before our time is out. Rogers, Arkansas, good morning.
Good morning. I don't support legalization of any drug whatsoever. I'm a black or white. There is no gray area. I don't believe, I believe in right or wrong. I mean, wrong is wrong, right is right. And also, you said something about doing or smoking pot in your home. I used to smoke pot a long time ago. I'm 50, and this is back in the early 70s, and I don't do it anymore. I'm a Christian now. But when you smoke pot, usually, you might go to a friend's house or something. You're going to have to go home eventually. When you're driving that car, it can be dangerous because you're really paranoid and you really try to drive slow. I mean, you can hit somebody and you may not even know it. I mean, you might think it's a bump in the road or something, but you might run over somebody. But I want to tell you something. When you said something about Hispanics and blacks or whatever being picked on by police or whatever, I am so tired of people thinking that they're victims all the time because of their color or they're a minority or whatever.
Governor.
Well, you point out a couple of facts. It's never going to be legal to smoke pot and get in a car and drive it. Now, we want to put our heads in the sand and believe that none of that is happening today because we have laws that say you can't smoke marijuana? No, we got people smoking marijuana. We got people driving today, every single day. Again, that's never going to be legal. But again, and it is terribly discriminatory. It is. It's a fact. You think half the people in this country that smoke marijuana are Hispanic? I don't, and yet that's half the arrests. It's not fair. Reality is, it is not fair.
Alexandria, Virginia, good morning.
I want to talk about education. I wish the Republicans here would make it mandatory, or the Democrats, that history should be mandatory from the first grade all the way through high school with world history. Now in this country, we have Clinton who wants oral history. We have half a page on George Washington. The young are told about slavery, oppression. The Europeans have robbed the native of the Americans of their land. The Africans arrived in chains. And now we have what you call a hate crime by Gore and Clinton, which is minority, homosexuals, and women. And the white male is known as greedy, racist, sexist, and polluters.
Governor, teaching history.
You know what? I'm a firm advocate of school vouchers. For 3 years now in New Mexico, I have pressed for every single student in the state of New Mexico getting a voucher to be able to be redeemed at public schools or private schools, believing that we need to bring competition to public schools in this country. When you talk about history, I think, again, what you need to do is you need to be able to free up this competition, and for some that want history, that history needs to get taught. I would not disagree with you whatsoever. I think competencies need to be tested so that we find out whether or not history, in fact, is being taught. Reading, writing, arithmetic, we need to be testing those competencies. Like I say, I'm a firm advocate of school choice, bringing competition to public education, something that, in my opinion, would get better doing that.
Just a few more minutes with Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico. He's a triathlete and has competed in the Ironman in Hawaii. Just a few more minutes with the governor. Cold Spring, Minnesota, good morning.
Good morning. See, it's, yeah, Ironman. I wish I was that. I want to ask you a couple of quick questions about tobacco. And I hope they don't hang up on me like they did 2 callers ago. But
we have just a few seconds, so get to it.
$3.50 a pack is in Minnesota, $5 in New York. How much of that does Philip Morris get? Less than 30 cents a pack. Is that not right?
I have no idea. If you're trying to relate that to, I mean, it is costly. When you look at marijuana today, you wonder why there's a marijuana problem when it comes to the black market of marijuana. Marijuana sells for more than gold at the retail level. There's a problem when marijuana sells for more than $300 an ounce. Hey, that's a real problem.
Caller, where are you from? Caller, are you with us? Try another line. Caller, where are you from? You're on with the governor.
I just want to say that I support you 100% on your efforts to legalize marijuana. I don't smoke it, I never have, but I think I agree with you that it's criminal to put these young people in jail at such a young age and ruin their lives because they experiment with marijuana when they can listen on the news and hear that, well, Al Gore smoked it when he was a young person, and perhaps George Bush smoked it when he was a young person.
Governor.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And one thing that probably everybody is aware of, let me just point out the profile of pusher. The person that we're putting behind bars in America today is not somebody who really smokes marijuana or does drugs. The person we're putting in jail today is the person that has sold small amounts of drugs numerous times. And you'd be surprised of the thousands that we do have behind bars. We're not putting any kingpins behind bars. Everybody wants to put the pusher behind bars. The reality of the pusher is a user who sells a little bit of their own stash to their friends and ends up in jail because they've sold it multiple times. The typical drug user or the typical person behind bars is the woman who's mother of three, single parent, who cuts off a third of her little rock of crack cocaine and sells it to an undercover policeman for the third or fourth time, and because of federal mandatory sentencing, that woman is now in jail for 15 or 20 years, and her kids are wards of the state. Now that's the reality of our drug laws today.
Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico, we're out of time. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
House of Representatives